my grandfather's grandfather, his name was Jacob DuBose, and in the 1860s he fought for the Confederacy. He joined the Florida Regiment and went off to war. I have here a newspaper article from the Frostproof News that was dated November 13th, 1986. It was a Veterans Day edition written by Gene McCall. And it says, one Frostproof family has just cause to remember those fallen heroes. They too have paid the supreme price for freedom. In the 1860s, soon after the birth of his son William, on April 18, 1859, the family patriarch, Jacob DuBose, went to war with the Florida Regiment in the war between the states. Their last memory of him was to be his farewell salute. He never returned. Despite much effort, his grave has never been found. Since that time, and actually in the last couple of years, we have found his grave. And it was a source of good news to finally know what happened to him. There had actually been all kinds of stories about what happened to him. Some of them involved him possibly deserting the army and ending up in Virginia with a new family. And of course, that wasn't the best story, but that's the one I heard a lot. But we did find that in fact he was wounded in battle, he was taken as a prisoner of war, and he died as a prisoner of war. He's buried at the Cave Hill Cemetery in Louisville, Kentucky. There's two parts to that cemetery. One is the National Cemetery. It was actually built primarily as a cemetery for Union soldiers who died during the Civil War. There's very, very few Confederate soldiers who were buried there. And he's one of those, and that probably explains why his grave was so hard to find, because nobody would ever think to look for him being buried there when so few Confederate soldiers were buried there. But that is where his grave is, and it's a great thing to know. There's a private part to that cemetery as well, where a lot of famous people are buried, like Colonel Sanders is buried there. The lady who wrote Happy Birthday is buried there, and they both have these memorials built for them. So that's just a little background on the DuBose family. Of course, they weren't, other than my grandfather's parents and his brothers and sisters who came in 1912, that's where their association with Frostproof began. The Carter side of the family, however, goes back much further than that. My grandmother's father's name was Edward Carter, and he was born on the banks of the Alafia River in Polk County on October 1st, 1861. Now that date is interesting for several reasons. Polk County was formed as a county from Hillsborough County on February 1st, 1861. So he was born in the county just a few months after it became a county. Florida seceded from the United States and joined the Confederacy in March of 1861. So when he was born in October, he was actually born in the Confederate States of America, as Florida had seceded. His father's name was Isaac Carter, and he was born near St. Augustine in 1811. That was before Florida belonged to the United States. It was still part of Spain at the time, and so my great-grandfather was actually born in Spanish Florida. At some point in time, Isaac Carter and his father, whose name was Jackson Carter, they both lived in Spanish Florida, and they had done something that earned the favor of the Spanish king. Because in 1795, the King of Spain rewarded Jackson Carter with a land grant for about 640 acres of land in what is today downtown Jacksonville. We lost it. Somewhere along the way we lost it. You all remember this book, I'm sure. That little tidbit of history was so important that in this little article on Edward Carter, they actually put in a picture of the land grant. This actually is the one that was signed by Teddy Roosevelt, recognizing the former Spanish land grant. So this is the patent from the United States government giving him that 640 acres in Duval County that had been given to his forefathers from the King of Spain. I actually, through the years, have ended up with the original of that patent. And so this is what's in the book here. This is the original of that. And that's something that's very treasured in my family. And I'm proud to have it. Again, in my research for this, and this is the part of what I said earlier that I really want to get into further as time goes on. Again, on the computer, I was able to find this document, which is called, it's not called anything, but it's a petition to the United States government to get that document. So this is the petition that was filed to get that. And attached to this petition is a translation of that 1795 Spanish land grant. So, there's a lot of history here. It's very difficult to read. I haven't been able to sit down and read it all yet. I might have to go to where the originals are and actually try to make better copies. But these have just been found in the last month. And I don't think anybody in my family even knew they existed until we started thinking about coming here and speaking today. So I'm going to research that further and try to get to the bottom of that. My grandmother's mother, her name was Ollie. They always knew her as Ollie Kersey Carter. And she was born on June the 23rd, 1876 in Manatee County. Her parents were Wright Kersey and Emma Laufman Kersey. Wright Kersey initially homesteaded Kissimmee Island, but by 1895 he'd moved his family to Midland again. So there's that Midland connection one more time. So my grandmother's mother had actually lived in Midland at some point as well, before my grandmother was even born. The 1900 census lists Wright Kersey as owning his own home in Midland, Florida, free and clear of a mortgage. The census report says he could read and write and speak English, and that his wife Emma was also literate. So there's a little bit of documentation about the fact that they lived in Midland in 1900. My grandmother's parents met on the Kissimmee River down near Fort Bassinger. She was down there, and my grandmother's father was a steamboat captain. He would drive a steamboat down the Kissimmee River from Kissimmee all the way down there and then back. And they met while he was making one of those voyages. And again, I have another newspaper article here. This is from November 6th, 1986, by Jean McCall in the Frostproof News. And just let me read you a brief part of this. She says, I recently visited the site of the 19th century settlement that grew out of the original setting of Old Fort Kissimmee. It's an isolated spot with a natural beauty on a winding river that is seldom seen by the modern tourist. The quietness there is broken only by the chirping of birds and the ancient oaks or a plane flying toward the Avon Park bombing range. In this serene setting, it takes an active imagination to recreate the activity that once abounded there. Only a rope-fenced cemetery leaves a hint of the past life. In the 1890s, it was a bustling community with a schoolhouse and a Baptist church. The steamboats that traveled the river between the Kissimmee City and Bassinger on their weekly trips made regular stops there to refuel. They also delivered supplies such as flour and tobacco to the settlers. On one spring day in 1892, a group of youngsters were eagerly awaiting the arrival of the steam wheeler Rosita and her captain, a favorite of the children. The anticipation bloomed on their faces. Suddenly, a puff of black smoke belched from the single stack of the steamer as she came into view. Here she comes, shouted the first youngster to see her prow coming around the bend. The captain tooted his whistle to their delight. One among the group standing along the shore was a 15-year-old miss with raven tresses. Her freshly scrubbed face was etched with a winning smile and bewitching ebony eyes. Her beauty was much deeper than one could see. It was an inner beauty that made her beloved to all who knew her. As one of the crewmen, a stalwart man, prepared to anchor the boat and secure her mooring, he glanced up to see those dark eyes looking right at him. His heart was lost, and as they came ashore, he turned to a mate and remarked, "There's the girl I'm going to marry." Their future was chartered that day. Before the year was over, the two were married in Kissimmee. Thus began the story of Edward M. Carter and Ollie Kersey, who were among the early settlers of Frostproof. So a little glimpse into and how they met.